A couple of weeks ago, we talked all about the brand new 2025 Cummins engine and all the updates that are coming along with it, which I'm pretty excited for. But now we have more information on the 2025 Ram HD platform as a whole. Things like pricing, max payload, max towing capacity, GVWR, axle gearing, all of which I'm excited to get into. Welcome back, I'm Alex, and well, we are pretty far from Detroit, where I was hoping to be this weekend to see the unveiling of these brand new HD Ram trucks at the Detroit Auto Show. The smarty pants that I am forgot to realize that I would need a passport to get down to Detroit before I made that promise, but you live and learn, I guess. Like I mentioned, there is quite a bit of information now out on these Ram HD trucks. You can actually build and price a 2025 Ram HD truck on Ram's website, which is pretty cool. And as usual, there are a couple of things that grabbed my attention. The first thing being, aside from the updated powertrain, these trucks didn't really change that much. Back in Ontario, when I talked all about the new Cummins engine updates, and I'll link that video down below, there is one thing that has come to light since then, and it is the fact that Cummins is going with a helical cut gear train, which I find interesting. For anyone not in the know, HD engines like this Cummins engine use a gear train to run things like your camshaft, engine timing, high pressure fuel pump, potentially an air compressor, sometimes your oil pump, all get run on the gear train, whereas something like a lighter duty engine would use potentially a timing chain to do the same thing. A gear train is just a stronger option to do so. There are a number of benefits with helical cut gears, and the one that Cummins has highlighted is a reduction in noise and vibration. Helical cut gears are also stronger and have the ability to transfer more torque. Now, there are some downsides, including weight, cost of manufacturing, and critically, with helical cut gears, we now have axial force put on them, which needs to be controlled. The gear train on the pickup truck 6.7 Cummins is always in the front, and the commercial grade 6.7 Cummins, the gear train's actually usually in the rear, something like on a school bus. And there's a number of pros and cons to both setups. A benefit of having the gear train at the rear, like the commercial 6.7 Cummins do, is that it's pretty much buried under the cab, and this means you get less noise and vibration. A downside of having a rear gear train is that all the applications that are run off it, like a high pressure fuel pump, an oil pump, potentially an air compressor, well, they're buried under the cab. The benefit of having a front gear train is that those applications, like a high pressure fuel pump, are usually easier to access. The downside, like we are talking about right now, is usually an increase in noise and vibration. So if Cummins was looking to potentially make these engines quieter, putting helical gears in the gear train is a good place to start. This 2024 engine really is not that loud. You can hear me just fine as this thing idles. We even opened the hood here. I mean, yeah, it still has that diesel knock, that famous Cummins inline six sound, but she's pretty tame. I mean, even driving down the road, I'm not gonna say it's quiet, but it's really not that aggressive. Quieter or not, one major thing to consider with these new helical cut gears is weight. We know that in 2025, Cummins is dumping this compacted graphite iron block, going back to a cast iron block, which should ideally be stronger, but also add anywhere from 5 to 7% more weight to this already very heavy engine. And to me, I wonder how that would affect payload, because that is one of the biggest complaints I hear people say about these Ram HD trucks, especially the Ram 2500, is that the payload numbers are just too low. These Cummins engines are the heaviest in the segment, this engine alone weighing over 1,000 pounds with the lighter CGI block, yet Ram offers the lowest GVWR in their 2500s out of the competition, so it doesn't leave much room for a good heavy payload. Now, I will give Ram some credit. They have actually bumped up the GVWR on their 2500s, going from 10,000 pounds to 10,190. But looking across to the competition, Ford's top GVWR on their 2500s is 10,800 pounds with a lighter engine as well. So don't expect the payload gap to decrease anytime soon. The max payload on a 2024 Ram 2500 with a Cummins engine, something like this truck, is 3,150 pounds. Now, the max payload on a 2025 Ram 2500 with a Cummins engine is 2,700 pounds, despite gaining an extra 200 pounds of GVWR. So the new trucks are losing a little bit of payload, which I don't think people want to hear. And well, those figures we have to remember are with two-wheel drive standard cab long box trucks. Now I do have to correct myself just a little bit because you can't get a Cummins engine in a standard cab long box. As you can see, our only engine option is the HEMI. Moving back, so if we go to a crew cab, obviously now we can get our Cummins engine. And so this is why we see such a drop in the max payload numbers. But if we go to the 2024 Ram 2500 payload numbers with a crew cab two-wheel drive, you can see it's 2,760. So technically, we still are losing some payload, especially with the GVWR being bumped up 200 pounds, but it's not as dramatic as I first said. So just keep that in mind. Next is gearing, and this one actually surprised me. We are getting 342 gears across the whole Ram HD platform moving forward, and that is the only option of gearing that you guys will have. And I know we're getting the new ZF 8-speed, which looks fantastic, by the way, and that should help to offset that this rather low 342 gearing, but I would have loved to have seen some higher gearing options for those who wanted it. I think for a Ram 2500, 342 gears is probably just fine. You'll be able to tow 20,000 pounds pretty confidently. Even looking at the competition, GM's 2500s, they all run 342 gears as well, I believe. And Ford's F250s with the POWERSTROKEs, you have the option of running 331s or 355. So all within the same ballpark. Where I get hung up is with the 3500s and the 3500 dualies. If I'm ordering a Ram 3500 dually, hoping to tow my horse trailer, my big toy hauler, I want higher gearing in my truck. And I hate to say it, but our friends at Ford, they offer a 3500 dually with their POWERSTROKE with 410 gears and a 10-speed transmission, 2 more gears than the 8-speed ZF. So to me, it's a little disappointing why Ram wouldn't at least offer something like a 373, ideally a 410 to customers who know they're going to be towing heavy, looking for a 3500, a 3500 dually. And it's a pretty easy way just to add towing performance to the truck. As we jump on the highway, Ram has said that the lower gearing should help lower engine RPM by about 25% while driving at highway speeds and should save some fuel. Great. You guys tell me all the time that if you're worried about fuel economy in an HD truck, you shouldn't be buying an HD truck. And I don't necessarily agree with you, but if I was looking for a 3500 dually, I'm really not concerned about losing a little bit of fuel economy to some higher gears. In fact, I would much rather have the option of getting higher gears for maximum towing performance. Another thing to consider is that with a higher geared axle, much more of that torque is being multiplied after your transmission, your transfer case, your U-joint, your drive shafts, where with the 342s, more of that torque is going to have to be multiplied in the transmission, through the transfer case, down the drive shaft, through your U-joints. So that's just something else to consider. GM has done the same things with their HD trucks. Any truck that gets a Duramax diesel engine gets 342 gears no matter what. And I imagine that probably makes the production side of things a little bit cheaper, just having one gear set. I've never been a fan of it. I like to have options, which is why I like Ford's approach, giving the customer options depending on what application they plan on using the truck in. And that leads me to my next point, towing. The 2025 Ram 3500 has a max towing capacity of 36,610 pounds, which is wild for a pickup truck. My 1995 F350 has a max towing capacity of 10,000 pounds. Needless to say, over the past 30 years, towing capacities have risen just a little bit. But that max towing capacity in the new 3500s is actually about 500 pounds less than the current outgoing 3500s in 2024. And Mopar insiders suggest perhaps the 342 gears could be the culprit, especially since these trucks are now getting 2 extra gears with that ZF 8-speed. Ideally, we'd like to see that max towing number increase because of that new transmission. And this isn't the first time we've seen this. The Ram 1500s also lost some towing capacity moving into 2025, which is just a little bit odd. What about the 2500s when it comes to towing ability? Well, it's relatively unchanged. The 2024 Ram 2500s had a max towing ability of 19,990 pounds. The 2025 Ram 2500s are slated to have a max towing capacity of 20,000 pounds, so gaining about 10 pounds of towing, which to me is a little bit disappointing if I'm gonna be honest. We're gaining 60 horsepower, 220 pound-feet of torque. We got this brand new ZF 8-speed transmission with 2 extra gears. We're also paying an extra $3,000 for this new engine, yet we're only getting an extra 10 pounds of towing capability. Seems just wrong. Now, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that the towing ability for this new 2025 Ram was stunted because of the relatively low payload numbers. We all pretty much know that if you want a bumper pull, you need about 10 to 15% of your tongue weight up front here. If you want a gooseneck, it should be right around 20%. So at 20,000 pounds, if we want to put a gooseneck on here, ideally we should have 4,000 pounds on the bed. Well, with a max payload of only 2,700 pounds, we are well short of that. Even on a bumper pull, it's gonna get pretty hairy, especially when we calculate passenger weight, gear in the truck. It just does not leave much room to tow more weight than 20,000 pounds. And that's why I think Ram has stuck with the 20,000 pound figure, not because the engine isn't capable, that beautiful, if you would, there you go, focus, that beautiful Cummins, but rather because the chassis just can't handle the payload right now. And even if we were very generous saying that a crew cab 4x4 had a max payload of like 2,400 pounds, 20,000 pound trailer on the back at a bare minimum of 10% on the tongue, that's 2,000 pounds. You get 2 adults in there, maybe a dog, maybe some gear. You're most likely over the legal payload. And in my opinion, that's why Cummins most likely left the towing figure basically the same. Now, don't get me wrong, because the towing performance is most likely dramatically increased, and I'm excited to get the 2025 truck on my towing loop to see that performance jump, because having all that extra power and that 8-speed transmission should make a big difference. But it is still a little bit disappointing to see that max towing figure not move. Again, looking at the competition, the F250 has a max towing capacity of 23,000 pounds, GM's 2500s, 22.5. So there is still a little bit of a gap there, and it would have been nice to see this truck jump up a little bit. Next, and where the rubber meets the road for most people, is price. I've read a ton of comments, people saying all they want is an affordable, reliable, heavy-duty truck, and it does seem like these 2025 Ram HD trucks are going to be a little bit pricey. All right, let's build ourselves a truck here. We're gonna pick the Bighorn, which is relatively low on the trim scale here. 4x4, we're gonna pick a crew cab short box. Let's build her up. And we're gonna pick a single option, that is the 6.7 Cummins. And that brings us to $70,600, but we're not done yet. We need taxes. And well, in the state of Maine, which is the closest state to me, that is 5.5%. So we'll bring up our handy dandy calculator, multiply that in, and that brings us to just about $74,500. But again, we're not done yet. What if we want to finance? So now I said we'll put $10,000 down on the truck, bring us to $64,500, 7-year term at 6.49, which is a pretty modest interest rate bi-weekly. That adds another $16,000 onto the total, bringing us to about $90,000 out the door price for this relatively low trimmed Ram 2500 Cummins. But it gets a little bit better for us up here in the Great White North, also known as Canada, seeing the exchange rate on the US dollar basically making the Canadian dollar a little bit more valuable than monopoly money. Now, if we were to take the exchange rate at face value, that same truck would cost us $102,000 Canadian. You add a little bit of tax on top of that, we're talking about $117,000. And we add a little bit of financing on top of that, we are talking about $142,000 for a pretty low-level trimmed HD diesel truck. I wish I was joking, but I'm not. With that being said, pricing in Canada for these new HD trucks have not been released yet, up to this date at least, so we don't really know for sure. Typically, it does seem like the pricing does not directly reflect the exchange rate. In fact, it's usually actually cheaper to buy these trucks in Canada. At least it has been for the last little bit. So we'll keep an eye on that. But expect, if you do look to buy one of these HD trucks, that bottom figure at the bottom of the page, it's probably going to be 6 figures. Well, to conclude this far with the new Ram HD trucks, there are some pros and cons. I really like what's happening with the powertrain. I like what Cummins is doing, trying to address some weak points, not necessarily adding a ton of power. In fact, they really didn't add much power at all, rather just focusing on making the engine better, which I like. I would have loved to have seen them also address the valve train, the lifter problems, but I guess we'll have to wait and see to see if these new 2025 engines are also experiencing valve train issues. Behind the Cummins engine, we have the new ZF 8-speed powerline transmission, which I am very excited about. If they're anywhere near as good as the ZF 8-speed in the Ram 1500s, we are in fantastic hands. In terms of the on-paper numbers like payload and towing figures, not as impressed. I don't really know what to make of it, especially since we are technically losing some payload ability and towing ability, or at least matching the previous truck when it comes to the 2500s, especially because these trucks were already more or less behind the 8 ball in terms of the competition. Both Ford and GM were ahead of these Ram trucks, and to see these on-paper figures not necessarily move, in fact, in some instances actually go down, may not give these trucks the most competitive edge moving forward, if that makes sense. As always, guys, let me know what you guys think, because I always love reading those comments and get information from what you guys have to say. If you did like the video, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. And if you like cool stuff like this, if you like Cummins engines, don't forget to subscribe, because we got a lot more of that stuff coming down the line. But enough of me. We'll see you in the next freaking video.